Welcome to a strange journey, where the past isn't just history, but a world stitched together by laws so absurd, you'll start questioning the very meaning of freedom. So lean back, let your mind drift for a moment, because tonight we're traveling back to Edo, Japan, a world where every breath, every gesture, even the way you smiled, was dictated by law. If you're someone who loves the mysteries your schoolbooks never dared to tell, then this might just be the video that helps you fall asleep, haunted, or keeps you up all night, wondering how any of this was real. Imagine a world where getting a haircut could land you in jail, where wearing the wrong color fabric could mark you as a rebel, and where having too fancy a dinner and too delicious a meal was proof you'd committed the sin of arrogance. Sounds insane, right? But that wasn't fiction. That was daily life for millions of people during Japan's Edo period, a time both dazzling and suffocating, where order was maintained through fear, obedience, and the illusion of harmony for over 260 years. The Tokugawa Shogunate ruled Japan through a web of regulations so detailed, so obsessive that almost nothing escaped its reach. The length of your hair, the color of your kimono, the food on your plate, even the eyes you were allowed to meet. This wasn't just a government. It was a machine, a system designed to manage society through the tiniest strings of human behavior. And the strangest part? People accepted it. They believed order was peace. And freedom was the first step toward chaos. In this series, we'll peel back the layers of those bizarre laws. The very rules that made Edo, Japan, a perfectly organized contradiction. Our journey unfolds in 5 chapters, each one revealing a different face of this strange world. First, we begin with the haircut law, and when identity was a crime, where a single snip of scissors could decide your class, your honor, and even your life. Hair, something as personal as it gets, became a symbol of loyalty and submission. Then we'll meet the Edo fashion police. Yes, they were real. People who enforced morality through clothing. Wear the wrong color kimono and you could be fined for living above your station. A society where status was woven in silk and sin was stitched in gold thread. Next comes the laws of desire. Because under Shogun Tsunayoshi, known famously as the dog shogun, even emotions were regulated. Love, lust, passion, all placed under state supervision. Fall for the wrong person. And it wasn't just scandalous, it was illegal. And once the heart was tamed, Edo took it further. Bushido. When honor became an obsession. A world where death itself was seen as the highest virtue, where men slit their own bellies just to keep their dignity intact. Their final smile proof of ultimate obedience. Finally, we arrive at the last, and perhaps the most haunting chapter. The laws for the dead, when death required permission. Because even after your body turned to ash, your soul still had paperwork to file. In Edo, peace, even eternal peace, needed official approval. But don't worry, this isn't going to be a dry history lecture. This is a story where every rule hides a secret, and every punishment reveals something deeper about power, control, and the fear of freedom itself. It's a strange, beautiful, and deeply human journey. A reminder that the past still whispers to us today. Freedom was never free. It was always something people had to fight for, or quietly surrender. If you love strange history, hidden truths, and the kind of stories your textbooks left out, hit that subscribe button now, because we're only standing at the first gate of the bizarre laws of Edo, Japan. You won't believe were real. Now, take a deep breath, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and step with me into Edo, where the law didn't just govern your actions, it defined your soul. The wind slides through Edo's tiled roofs, carrying the scent of rain, and the metallic tang of samurai swords still wet with blood. Under the pale glow of a paper lantern, a man sits quietly on a wooden stool. In front of him, a trembling barber grips his scissors. "Sir, are you sure you want it that short?" The barber asks, his voice shaking. The man smiles. "Just cut it. It's too damn hot." The moment the blades touch the knot of hair, the shonmage, the room holds its breath, because in Edo, Japan, a haircut wasn't just a haircut. It could be a criminal offense. No, I'm not exaggerating. In 17th century Japan, the way you wore your hair could literally decide your fate. You see, in Tokugawa society, hair wasn't just hair. It was your social ID, your status tag, glued right to your head. The samurai, Japan's noble warrior class, wore the iconic shonmage, the front of the head shaved clean, with a small top knot tied neatly at the crown. To modernize, it might look like a medieval Wi-Fi outage, but back then it was the symbol of honor, rank, and loyalty, and if you weren't a samurai, yet dared to wear that style, you might as well have waved a flag saying, "Hey, I'm pretending to be nobility." The Tokugawa authorities, masters of social micromanagement, wouldn't let that slide. They'd strip you of your top knot. And with it, your dignity, your place in society, and sometimes your life, extreme? Absolutely. But Edo was a place where everything was extreme and meticulously organized. From hair, we moved to clothes, because Edo turned dressing up into an art form of oppression. The so-called sumptuary laws were the luxury control rules of the time. They sound like moral guidance. Live simply, be humble. But really, it meant if you're poor, stay poor. And don't you dare look rich. If you were a merchant who made a fortune, you still couldn't wear silk. Silk was reserved for the samurai. Purple dye? Forget it. It was the color of nobility, of spiritual power, and strictly forbidden to commoners. A rich Edo merchant could buy an entire marketplace, but if he walked out wearing a purple robe, he'd be invited for tea by the officials the next morning. And trust me, it wasn't the relaxing kind of tea. Here's the irony, though. Those merchants were the ones actually running the Edo economy. They were the backbone of trade, the real money. But to the Tokugawa government, they were still just lowly traders. They had wealth but no status. The samurai were still the elite, even though most of them had long since run out of wars to fight. Because Edo, you see, was a world without war. So what does a warrior do when there are no battles left to fight? He writes rules, he teaches morals, and he polices other people's haircuts. That's where Bushido was born, the way of the warrior, a strict moral code that samurai were expected to live and die by. It sounds noble, right? Honor, loyalty, respect, the willingness to die for one's name. But peel back the poetry, and Bushido starts to look a lot like a terms of service agreement. The kind you can never opt out of. You must obey. You must show humility. You must accept punishment without protest. In short, you must be the perfect citizen, by the government's definition. And here's where it gets eerie. Bushido didn't just belong to the samurai. It seeped into every layer of society. Teachers, farmers, craftsmen. Everyone learned to bow just right, speak softly, and never show too much emotion. Edo became a society of perfect calm. The kind of calm that comes not from peace, but from fear. It was obedience disguised as virtue. A nation of people who followed the law, not because they were forced to, but because they were afraid to be different. And the result? Order. A cold, immaculate order. For over 2 centuries, Edo had no civil wars.
No uprisings.
Hardly any crime impressive? Sure. But the price of that peace was freedom. Every person lived inside a fixed mold, defined by their hair, their clothes, their gestures, even the way they spoke. And, like any society that rigid, people started finding ways around the rules. Merchants wore double-layered robes, rough cotton on the outside, luxurious silk hidden underneath, broke samurai rented out, their titles so others could enjoy noble privileges. Artisans stitched secret gold patterns into the inner linings of their kimonos, a rebellion no one could see. That was Edo. Strict on the surface, brilliantly subversive underneath, and here lies the great paradox. Those suffocating rules, the very laws meant to control people, ended up sparking creativity. Even trapped inside a cage, humans find a way to express themselves. A hidden embroidery.
A slightly tilted top knot.
A quiet whisper of "I am me." Historians today say Edo was surprisingly eco-friendly. Everything was reused, old clothes resoled, paper recycled, even ashes turned into fertilizer. Not because people were green, but because the law punished waste. Long before sustainability became trendy, Edo had already mastered it, out of fear, not virtue. But maybe the strangest part isn't the laws themselves, it's how deeply people believed in them. No one questioned why a haircut could be a crime. No one protested the ban on luxury. They simply believed it was all for a reason to keep the peace. Sound familiar? Because somewhere in our modern world we're living in an Edo 2.0, where every action, every word, and every thought is being monitored. The only difference? The swords have been replaced by smartphones, so when we look back at Edo, the chilling part isn't how different they were, it's how similar they are to us, a society proud of its order, obedience, and control, but quietly losing the one thing that makes life truly human: freedom. And that was just the beginning. Because what comes next gets even stranger. When the law stops at nothing, not even your emotions, your desires, or your soul. Welcome to Edo, where every breath you take is regulated by law. If you ever thought fashion police were just a joke from TV shows, you've clearly never lived in Edo, because back in 17th century Japan, there really were patrols roaming the streets, not to catch thieves or drunks, but to arrest people. For wearing the wrong color? No, that's not a metaphor. They had ledgers, they had authority, and they could confiscate your entire wardrobe just for being too stylish at its peak. Edo had over 1 million residents and thousands of rules dictating exactly what you could wear, what it could be made of, and what colors were legally acceptable. These were called the sumptuary laws, a set of restrictions so detailed it makes modern dress codes look like anarchy. Take this one. For example, deep purple Murasaki no Iro was reserved exclusively for the highest class, the shogun's family, the daimyo lords and elite samurai. Purple symbolized purity, loyalty, and above all, divine authority. If a commoner dared to wear it, that was basically a self-issued death warrant for their social reputation. There's a famous case from 1671, a wealthy merchant in Nihonbashi, Edo's busiest marketplace, was caught wearing a haori, a traditional jacket with just a thin lilac trim. That tiny strip of color was enough to ruin his life. The fashion patrol stormed into his shop, flipped through every bolt of fabric, and seized his entire inventory. The charge, written in their logbook: unlawful display of dignity beyond one's station. He was fined heavily, forced to make a public apology, and his offending jacket burned on the spot, and as a warning to anyone else thinking of dressing above their class. Sounds ridiculous, right? a country where color itself could be a crime. But to the Tokugawa Shogunate, every thread, every hue, was a political statement. Edo society was built like a vertical ladder, with samurai on top, farmers next, craftsmen below them, and merchants at the very bottom. Even if you were a merchant rolling in cash, you were still considered morally inferior, a necessary evil, not an honorable citizen. Money didn't buy you virtue, and the law was designed to make sure wealth never climbed above morality. So Edo's merchants had to live like humble billionaires. You could own 10 houses, but you better wear rough cotton. You could dine on the finest fish, but only from cheap ceramic bowls, and if anyone discovered silk in your wardrobe, well, congratulations, you'd just earned yourself an official tea invitation, and it definitely wasn't the relaxing kind. Of course, the people of Edo weren't stupid. When rules get too strict, people get creative. Tailors began designing Edo komon, patterns so tiny they looked plain from a distance. But up close, they revealed hidden worlds, family crests, poems, even secret protest symbols. A kimono that looked modest was actually a quiet declaration. Yes, I follow the rules. But no, I don't agree with them. In 1683, Shogun Tsuneyoshi, nicknamed Inu Kubo, the dog shogun, took things to another level. He banned commoners from wearing silk altogether, except during funerals or religious ceremonies. Tsuneyoshi was famous for his compassion toward animals, but when it came to people, he was ruthless. He believed luxury was the root of corruption, that if people lived simply, society would become morally pure. And so began the era when fashion itself became a sin. You couldn't display wealth. You couldn't dress above your rank. You
Couldn't let your neighbors think you were
doing better than them. It was the age of
mandatory modesty, and your clothing became proof of your obedience.
the bustling streets of Nihonbashi and Asakusa. The city patrol, the Yoriki and Doshin, didn't just guard against thieves. They watched for fashion crimes. They were trained to recognize fabrics by sight, and allegedly by sound. If the rustle of your clothes was too smooth, too soft, they knew it was silk, and that alone could get you stopped with a question like, "What's your rank?"
Who gave you permission to wear this?
But Edo's citizens, as always, fought back their own way, quietly. They invented a concept called iki, a hidden aesthetic philosophy. To be iki was to be refined without showing off, elegant without excess. A truly stylish person wouldn't wear flashy silk. They'd choose deep indigo cotton, so dark it was almost black, but on the inside, they'd line it with silk. No one would see it.
No one would know.
But the wearer would feel it, and that was victory enough. That's the Japanese way of rebellion. Silent, subtle, and soaked in pride, and from that quiet defiance was born an entirely new aesthetic, Edo chic. A beauty built on paradox. The more you restrict it, the more creative it becomes. The tighter the control, the finer the art. Historians today believe those fashion laws, as absurd as they were, actually helped shape Japan's unique sense of design. A culture where elegance is measured not by what's shown, but by what's hidden. You don't flaunt the gold, you weave it into the lining.
You don't shout your identity out, you whisper it in.
Embroidery, from the subtle patterns of Edo kimonos to modern Japan's minimalist design philosophy, you can still trace that DNA of quiet beauty born from restriction. It's ironic, isn't it? The Edo fashion police wanted to suppress vanity, but instead they sparked an artistic revolution. Out of oppression came refinement, from control came creativity, and from silence came freedom. A freedom not in what you wore, but in how you wore it without getting caught. And if you think that sounds outdated, just remember the last time you dressed too fancy at work or bought something expensive and immediately hid the price tag. Modern society might not have literal fashion police, but we still get judged by what we wear, how we talk, and how much we spend. Somewhere out there, the spirit of Edo's Yoriki still lingers, only now they hold smartphones.
Not swords. Looking back, it's almost funny.
A time when the government believed banning beauty would create a beautiful society, that outlawing silk would make hearts pure. But the truth? People will always find a way to express themselves, whether it's a hidden gold thread under a kimono or a filtered photo on Instagram. Because fashion, no matter how tightly controlled, has always been humanity's way of saying, I exist. The Edo fashion police may have made purple a symbol of forbidden power, but it was the people who couldn't wear purple who created a culture the whole world now admires. Because when choice is stripped away, humans don't stop creating. They learn to make beauty within the boundaries, and that's just the surface. Because in Edo, control didn't stop at clothing. It reached deeper into love, desire, and the human heart itself. Join me in the next chapter, where we uncover the rules that tried to regulate emotion in the laws of desire, when the government controlled the heart. Remember the Edo fashion police? The folks who arrested people for wearing the wrong color? Now imagine a different force, one that didn't bust you for fabric or dye, but for desire. Yep, you heard that right. In Edo, emotions, the most private thing you have, was something the law tried to manage. It all starts with one man, Shogun Tokugawa Tsunayoshi, the fifth shogun, architect of some of the strangest love laws in Japanese history. Tsunayoshi, son of the third shogun Iemitsu, born in 1646, brilliant, bookish, an arts lover, and obsessed with animals. People called him Inu Kubo, the dog shogun. Why? Because he issued edicts that banned killing dogs, cats, even flies and rats.
Harm a creature, even by accident.
And you could face execution. In a country where cutting your hair could be a crime, and killing a rat was also a crime. You get the idea. Anything could be illegal. But here's what fewer people know. Tsunayoshi didn't just protect pets. He tried to control human instinct. He believed desire was the root of chaos. Men especially, he argued, needed to cultivate the mind and steer clear of carnal temptation. The result? A cascade of laws that modern ears will find absurd. And a little chilling. Take 1687's Edict of Compassion. It didn't just command kindness to animals, it also banned improper conduct between people. Translation, have a relationship outside marriage?
You could be arrested. Visit a pleasure district, either yukaku, expect interrogation.
Act too affectionate or too playful in public? You might be charged with disturbing moral order. Sounds like a virtuous utopia, right? Except Edo was, at the time, one of the pleasure capitals of the world. Inside Yoshiwara, the walled heart of Edo's nightlife, you could find everything. Sake, kabuki, poetry, music, and the oiran, elite courtesans who sold not just beauty, but conversation, artistry, and carefully crafted dreams. They wore dazzling kimonos, balanced on 8-inch wooden clogs, and spoke in the elegant register of the upper class. It wasn't a red light district. It was an industry of emotion organized with the precision of a religion. Of course, the shogunate couldn't just let that run wild, so they regulated it to the bone. Every brothel had to be registered. Every oiran services catalogued. Every male client logged in ledgers. If a samurai showed up too often, he could lose his post. If a merchant spent too much, he might be investigated for suspicious income. And the most ironic part, while Tsunayoshi outlawed promiscuity, contemporary notes from his own advisors say he lived with 3 male lovers inside the palace. Yes, The shogun who policed licentiousness allegedly preferred to do his moral research hands-on. One secretary wrote very politely, "The shogun shows deep concern for virtue to the point of frequently checking for violations." Now, that's court speak for he meddled in everyone's private life. What's truly frightening about Edo wasn't just prohibition. It was how willingly people accepted it. Desire was labeled yoku, a craving to be bridled by ethics. Schools taught children to keep strict decorum. Speak softly, laugh small, never let your heart ripple. It was an education system not designed to free the mind, but to bind the feelings. And the outcome? A society peaceful to the point of eerie. No public displays of love. No hugging in the street.
No dreams beyond your station. Affection moved underground, written as hidden poems, painted as metaphors.
Lived inside the head. Artists of ukiyo-e. Pictures of the floating world, like Hishikawa Moronobu and Utamaro, began engraving scenes where people were vividly,
Imperfectly human, those prints, that gorgeous daring.
sometimes too daring, were Edo's quiet answer. We still know how to love. So love learned to move in secret. A letter slipped in a market stall, a glance through 2 layers of paper screen, a poem with a folded hint sent through a friend of a friend. In a world under surveillance, love became a covert art. And here's the twist. All those bans on desire made Edo obsessed with pleasure. Ban love, and people dream about it. Ban laughter, and when they carve it in woodblock. Ban desire, and you make it the most powerful thing in the room. From those shadows bloomed a culture of art. Haiku, prints, kabuki, all reaching for the same forbidden fruit, to feel alive. Modern scholars have a term for this, Eros of Repression. The more you suppress, the stronger it gets. The more you press down, the more creative it becomes. Edo proved something strange and true. Humans can't live without emotion. Lock the heart, and people will draw the key. But that's also the tragedy. In a society where even love was regulated, beauty itself could become a crime, and the artist might be jailed for being too passionate. An actor exiled for laughter that felt too natural. A single ukiyo-e print showing a hint of skin could be labeled a threat to national morals. So Edo was this paradox. Every heartbeat was watched, and therefore every heartbeat mattered 10 times more. You've ever wondered why many modern Japanese interactions feel reserved, quiet, carefully controlled? The roots are here. They are the descendants of a society that learned to love in silence and survive within limits. Tsunayoshi died in 1709, but his edict about virtue, desire, order cast a long shadow. Maybe the strangest thing about Edo was how fear was turned into social glue.
Fear of standing out,
Fear of being mocked, fear
of loving too much. And yet, within that fear, Edo created a civilization rich in feeling, even if people weren't allowed to show it. Think they controlled everything.
Wait till you hear what came next, because in Edo, control didn't stop at emotions. Even death had rules, scripts, and stamped approvals. Join me in Chapter 4, Bushido, when honor became an obsession.
In Edo Japan, everything was regulated, your clothes, your emotions, even your dignity. If last time we talked about how the government tried to control people's hearts,
This time, imagine a society where even the soul had rules. This is the world of Bushido, the way of the warrior. not just a code of conduct, but a blueprint for existence itself. It was the reason thousands of samurai willingly chose death, all in the name of one thing: honor. Bushido is written with 3 characters. Bu, war, shu, warrior, do, the way, literally, the way of the warrior. Sounds noble, right? But in practice, it was more like a secular religion, one where faith wasn't directed toward heaven, but toward the edge of your own sword. Westerners often ask, why would anyone slice their own stomach open just for losing face? The answer lies in Bushido's chilling creed. Better to die with honor than live in shame. In Edo, dying the right way was often more respectable than living the wrong way. Bushido took shape in the 1600s, when the Tokugawa Shogunate united Japan. The wars ended,
And suddenly hundreds of thousands of samurai
were out of a job. With no battles left to fight, they became bureaucrats, teachers, moral enforcers. But a warrior without war? That's a sword without purpose, so Bushido gave them something else to fight for. A new battlefield inside themselves. It became their reason to exist. The code had 7 core virtues: gi, righteousness;
courage,
jin, compassion;
rei, respect;
makoto, honesty;
meiyo, honor;
chugi, loyalty. Sounds like a solid moral compass. But in Edo's reality, it became a gilded cage for the warrior's soul. For example, if a samurai was insulted and didn't respond, he lost his honor. But if he drew his sword and killed someone, he broke the law. Between 2 deaths, he'd choose the honorable one, seppuku. Seppuku, or harakiri, literally means cutting the belly. A ritual suicide. The samurai kneels on tatami, wears a white robe, and with a short dagger, the tanto, cuts across his own abdomen to prove sincerity. People believed the soul resided in the gut. To open your belly was to cleanse it in blood. Gruesome?
Absolutely.
But to them, it was the ultimate statement of integrity. A seppuku was ceremonial, even elegant. Witnesses gathered, officials read charges. The condemned recited a death poem, a gizei. One warrior once wrote, "Cherry blossoms bloom at dawn, most beautiful when they fall. So too the warrior." Then came the silence and the blade, a single moment between agony and transcendence, a death considered beautiful because it preserved honor. In Edo, meiyo, honor, was worth more than life itself. Modern minds might ask, why die just to avoid embarrassment? But in their world, losing face wasn't personal. It was treason of the soul. Dishonor didn't just shame you, or tainted your family, your master, your clan. That's where chugi, loyalty, took over everything.
A samurai owed absolute obedience to his lord, even if that lord was wrong.
He was expected to die for his master, even if he didn't understand why. There's an old Edo saying, "Reason may fail, but loyalty never does." And that blind loyalty gave birth to one of Japan's most famous legends, the tale of the 47 Ronin. Their lord, Asano Naganori, was forced to commit seppuku after insulting a corrupt official. His 47 followers became Ronin, masterless samurai. For 2 years, they pretended to live ordinary lives. Waiting, planning, then on a snowy night, they stormed the mansion of their lord's enemy, killed him, and surrendered themselves to justice. They were ordered to die, and each performed Seppuku. Edo citizens built statues, wrote plays, and called them heroes. A massacre became morality.
Murder turned into virtue. That's the terrifying beauty of Bushido.
When dying correctly becomes the highest form of living, it forged men of unshakable integrity and also destroyed
Countless souls, because Bushido wasn't
just ethics, it was control. The Tokugawa Shogunate used it as political glue. If warriors were ready to die for loyalty, rebellion became impossible. If honor mattered more than survival, society remained obedient. Peace was maintained, but it was peace bought with fear. Fear of shame, fear of dishonor. In Edo, you didn't need many prisons. You only needed one word: shame. Shame could kill faster than any sword. A whisper, a glare, a rumor in the marketplace, enough to push a man to ritual death. So Bushido was both a light and a fire. It produced extraordinary courage
and unimaginable suffering. The stories we celebrate of noble warriors and pure sacrifice hide the quieter tragedies. Wives who watched their husbands disembowel themselves.
Children taught that the worst sin wasn't death, but dishonor. The first lesson for a samurai's child wasn't be brave. It was don't fear dying, only fear disgrace. Sometimes, the nobility of Bushido was really just a lonely kind of perfectionism. When you live only to defend your reputation, you forget how to live for yourself. Today, people say Bushido is dead.
But it's not.
It's just evolved. It's there when a Japanese employee bows deeply to apologize for a delay, when someone works themselves sick out of loyalty to their company, when honor is measured not by swords, but by responsibility. Edo's way of the warrior became Japan's way of professionalism. The sword was replaced by discipline, the battlefield by the office, the seppuku by burnout. From the silent suicides of samurai to the quiet exhaustion of salarymen, the spirit of Bushido still breathes, just in a different uniform. Bushido, the path of honor.
A beautiful path.
Paved in blood, it taught people to die for what's right, but also made them afraid to live any other way. Maybe the real tragedy isn't death, but believing that only death can preserve dignity. But in Edo, even after death, people weren't free because the next chapter belongs to the dead themselves, the ones who had to follow laws even in the afterlife, where rest, like everything else in Edo, had to be officially approved. Join me in Chapter 5 of the Laws of the Dead, when even death needed permission. If, in the last chapter, honor was something people died for, then this one takes us somewhere even darker, a world where even death itself required permission. Yes. In Edo, Japan, dying wasn't enough. You had to die correctly. You'd think that once a samurai sliced open his stomach for honor, that would be the end. But no, the ever-diligent Tokugawa government wasn't done with you yet. Even in death, they had paperwork. Even as a ghost, you still had rules. They wanted to make sure you didn't disturb social order from the afterlife. Let's start with the basics. In Edo, being buried was a privilege. Only registered temples were allowed to bury people. If you died without temple sponsorship, you couldn't be buried on Buddhist ground. Your soul, technically, wasn't legal. This came from a system called the Dankasei, the temple patronage system. Every household had to register under a temple, pay annual fees, and let that temple handle every ceremony, funerals, memorials, prayers, you name it. It sounded religious, but really, it was surveillance disguised as faith. After several Christian uprisings, the Tokugawa Shogunate feared religion could fuel rebellion, so they turned temples into spiritual checkpoints. Every Japanese citizen had a certificate called a terauke. proof of Buddhist affiliation. Without it, you couldn't be buried. Your kids couldn't go to school. Your family could be accused of treason. It was an elegant system, and a terrifyingly effective one. Religion became government paperwork. Now picture this. A samurai dies by seppuku, opens his stomach to defend his honor. Moments later, officials are filling out burial forms. If the paperwork's wrong, the funeral's delayed. Even death in Edo was a bureaucratic process, the final admin task of your life. But it didn't end there. Once buried, your soul still lived in the records. Your name went into the koseki, the family registry. Your descendants had to pay yearly maintenance fees for your grave. If they failed, your plot could be reclaimed, your ashes moved, and your existence deleted from the books. You'd die a second death keeping on paper, and then came the really strange stuff. If you were executed for treason or rebellion, you didn't get a normal burial. You were sent to polluted ground, and no headstone, no name, no prayers. Just a mound of dirt for the crows. In Edo philosophy, clean and unclean weren't about hygiene. They were moral categories. A dishonored soul didn't deserve a clean grave, but here's the twist. Edo was obsessed with ghosts. People feared angry spirits, especially those denied proper burials. So even as the government forbade ceremonies for criminals, commoners secretly lit incense, built tiny altars, and whispered prayers, hoping those furious souls wouldn't come back for revenge. Out of this fear, Edo accidentally created Japan's ghost culture. Most of Japan's earliest ghost stories came from this era. Like Oiwa, the poisoned wife whose distorted ghost returned for vengeance, or Okiku, the servant girl who counted plates every night. Ichi,
Nitsan, 1, 2, 3.
Always stopping at 9, then sobbing. The people of Edo told these stories not just to scare themselves, but to release their own anxiety. Because in their world, ghosts were the only ones truly free from the rules. You could say the living were bound by Bushido,
And the dead by ritual. Edo was a society where every stage of existence had a process.
you registered at birth. You obeyed through life.
And when you died,
You filed for afterlife approval. No one truly belonged to themselves, not even after death. Yet, in this strict system, something unexpected happened. The more they controlled death, the more the Edo people turned it into an art form. Funerary kimonos in pure white, meticulously folded farewell letters, shrines arranged with the symmetry of tea ceremonies. Dying became performance, an elegant final act to prove you still had grace, even as a corpse. Maybe that's why what people feared most wasn't death itself, but dying the wrong way, being buried in the wrong place,
not being remembered.
having no one left to pray for you. That was the final tragedy of a life lived by the rules. When you step back, Edo looks like the perfect system of organized fear. People feared mistakes,
Feared standing out, feared being forgotten, and feared that even after dying,
they still might not have done it right. But beneath all those rules and rituals, one thing persisted. Something no law could ever erase. The longing for freedom. Whether alive or dead, the people of Edo found quiet ways to express it. Through poems, paintings, and ghost stories whispered at midnight, each one a tiny rebellion, a soft reminder from beyond the grave. If I can't live free,
at least let me dream free. And that, my friend,
is the end of this strange and haunting world, a place where haircuts could be crimes, and even souls needed paperwork, a society ruled by fear that somehow still gave birth to beauty, elegance, and resilience. If you've traveled with us through all 5 chapters, from hair and clothing to desire, honor, and now death, then you've seen what Edo was really teaching us. Freedom is never free. And even in the most disciplined societies, humans will always find a way to smile, to create, to dream. If you love these bizarre corners of history, make sure to subscribe for more stories that your textbooks never dared to tell. And if you believe the past still whispers to us, share this story, because somewhere out there, in the mist of old Edo, a restless soul is still waiting to have its story told.